dealing with fundraiser burnout. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the Fundraising School, and I'm joined today by Mallory Erickson. Mallory is the author of What the Fundraising, and it's a book that is helping fundraisers cope with the pressures and stress of their jobs. And Mallory, what a delight to have you with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Oh, Bill, I'm so thrilled to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
So as we dive into the book, What the Fundraising, we see what you did there. What was the genesis of this book? How did this all come together?
Yeah, well, the short story, hopefully, is that I was an accidental fundraiser who really was very uncomfortable fundraising. So uncomfortable that it ultimately led me to tremendous burnout. And in that state of burnout, when I was really considering if I needed to leave the nonprofit sector, I ended up having this accidental combination of life experiences where I got certified as an executive coach, trained in habit and behavior design and design thinking, and those frameworks came together and just fundamentally changed the way that I fundraised. And it had big financial implications, but more than anything, I started to love fundraising and I started to feel different. And that sort of set me off on this quest, both to share everything that had been beneficial to me with my peers, and then simultaneously to want to look closer at the relationship between how we feel and what we do. And the more that I started to understand some of the macro trends in our sector around declines in donor participation in the nonprofit sector and fundraiser burnout on a macro and systemic level and turnover rates, I started to believe, and I believe deeply, that those two problems are not unrelated, that they're caused by many of the same things, these transactional fundraising practices that so many of us have been taught that feel awful to us as fundraisers, ultimately dysregulating us, leading us to chronic stress and burnout, and don't feel good to our donors either, which means there is a way to solve for both at the same time. And, I love everything that you all do at the Fundraising School to really promote transformational, connected fundraising. And so, that's a little background on why I wrote the book.
Well, I appreciate that, Mallory. In fact, 95% of our alumni say that they gain more confidence to fundraise. And we believe it is that we do teach that transformational approach and let people know what is possible. And if you gain those skills, you can gain confidence. But it's still not an easy job. There still are stresses. Unfortunately, there still is burnout. What happened during COVID that also led you to write this book? So they shut everything down. We're sitting in our homes. The polio vaccine took 11 years. We're thinking, oh dear, this is going to be the next decade. And you had an epiphany.
Well, I started to see this paralysis happening in the sector, this narrative around it's inappropriate to fundraise right now. And I recognized that narrative because it was a limiting belief that I had put on my fundraising for years, for honestly, whatever reason or excuse or fear that I was holding. And so when I started to see this pattern emerge, and I'm not saying it wasn't unfounded and it wasn't a scary time, and it makes complete sense that our nervous systems and stress responses were activated. But I was like, this is really where executive coaching can make such a difference. And so I offered in a free fundraising Facebook group that I was a part of to do a group coaching program, thinking maybe 10, 15 fundraisers will show up. I had no childcare at the time. Everything was shut down. I had a 10-month-old. I was still frontline fundraising. I went to bed, I woke up, and 180 people had signed up. And I realized in that moment, like, wow, for a year, maybe before that, I had been trying to talk about, the relationship between how I felt and what I was doing and these things I had noticed in my practice. And I had heard over and over again, no, people just need more strategies. They just need more templates. They just need to be told what to do. They just need another webinar or, and deep inside of me, I was like, no, I think there are these big barriers that we're not talking about, these things that are happening inside of us that we aren't addressing. And if we don't, we can't take action on all those other things. And what I saw when COVID started, when 180 people signed up for this webinar, and ultimately I ended up doing it for 1,000 people in 2020, and it's really what led to my practice today. I realized that people were finally ready to talk about it. Not everybody. I heard for years, you talk too much about the nervous system, or can't you just give us another thing like this? Not everybody was ready, but a lot more people were ready. And, simultaneously, I think there was a lot of emerging conversation around mental health and wellness. And so it was, in sync with a lot of the themes that I think people were starting to be more open to exploring.
So you thought there were 10 people who would show up on Facebook. You had 1,000 show up, and you saw the, true lived experience of these folks saying, yes, I'm feeling so much stress and pressure, and it's leading to burnout. And now as an executive coach, you work directly with fundraisers all the time. You work with nonprofit organizations all the time. What are some of these common threads? Let's start again. And you touched on them a little bit, and some of them a little bit at the beginning. But again, when you're meeting with fundraisers, on the challenge side, and I want to get to the solution side in a moment, but on the challenge side, what are some of those common themes that you're hearing that are causing fundraisers to either burn out or just feel this overwhelming stress in their work?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few layers, right? One is the system-wide narratives that create a really kind of hostile environment for fundraisers, right? Scarcity mindset in our sector that is compounded by stigma around talking about money in society at large leads to these. So that narrative is sort of always has this sinking feeling, I think, in the back of people's minds that they're doing something wrong, or that what they're doing is bad. I remember being at a daycare event for my daughter when she was like a year and a half, and everybody was going around and sharing what they did for work. And I said I was a fundraiser. And the grandfather of one of the other kids said, "Oh, don't ask me for money." And there's all these tiny little moments we experience, right, that sort of reinforce this stigma, this scarcity mindset, and then these transactional fundraising practices that stem from that, right? The more fear we are experiencing, the more transactional we actually are likely to become. Because when we're in a fear and stress state, we have tunnel vision, and we can't be more creative and collaborative and flexible. And so we become really transactional as a stress response also. And so I think they find themselves in this loop where when things become urgent and dire, they become really transactional. And then when things are not urgent and dire, they go quiet with their donors because they have limiting beliefs around not wanting to bother them, right? Donor fatigue is one of the beliefs that surface through scarcity mindset and transactional fundraising. And, one of the other things is that when COVID hit, one of the other things I was really concerned about is that, research shows that when there's more government funding for things, and this is a weird moment to say this in because I believe there should be government funding for nonprofits, but the more government funding, the less fundraising an organization tends to do. And so when the PPP loan came out, what we did see with a lot of organizations was them pausing their fundraising because they had the money that they needed in the moment. And that's sort of another example of the transactional and scarcity mindset beliefs that we only think we need to fundraise, that fundraising is only the moment of money moving in to your organization, and that we only need to do it in a moment where we're desperate for money. And so I see, that sort of mentality, beliefs, cultures inside organizations are really detrimental. And then in my book, I talk about these 5 elements of fundraising that lead to burnout that we don't usually talk about. We talk a lot about overwork, and I'm not saying people are not overworked. They totally are, but there are these 5 other components that are leading to this. Pressure, right? Like a fundraiser hits their metrics and their goal doubles the next year with no more resources, no more time, and they feel like they barely crossed that finish line. Rejection dysregulates us. It leads to a stress response and can be a chronic stress response. Power dynamics, which we know exist in fundraising. Uncertainty, which there's no real way around that, right? We have uncertainty because we have these relationships that we don't always have clarity around what they will mean related to the goal that we're being held to. And so all of these different components compound on the fundraiser who's then sort of existing in this stigmatized and scarcity driven environment. And it's a hard space to navigate.
And yet you are in demand because you also have solutions, advice for fundraisers on how they can navigate through those challenges and come out on the other side. And again, not to say the work ever gets easy. And at the fundraising school, we say if it were easy, fundraisers, we wouldn't need you. Because
Mm,
it's hard, we need you.
mm,
We just let the robots do it if it were easy. So
mm.
we need leaders, we need fundraisers to be able to navigate through the challenges of fundraising because the public service mission is worth it. The people, the causes being served are worth it. And so that's why we need fundraisers doing their great work. How do you help them get there, Mallory? What types of solutions? And I know every person is different, every nonprofit is different, but are there some general categories that you're able to suggest to fundraisers?
Yeah. Really, it's sort of a process of both self-discovery and organizational discovery, honestly. And it starts with, I call it alignment fundraising or alignment first fundraising. And this strategy of fundraising has to start with inner alignment, right? We have to be aware of our experience, of how we feel, of where we're experiencing resistance and why. We really need to bring awareness to the thoughts and the beliefs that hold us back from taking the actions that we want to be taking. And in the first part of the solutions part of my book, the whole first chapter is my executive coaching framework that gets really deep into this in terms of how you show up, what are guiding some of your perceptions and your beliefs and energy that you're bringing to different things. What are the narratives we hear in our head, from limiting beliefs to assumptions to interpretations to some of this self-critic work. And the science, my book is filled with science from some of the top neuroscientists and behavioral scientists and psychologists in the world. And one of the things that I sort of really want to double click on is that it's easy to think that mindset is a quote on a mug. But the science continues to tell us that we simulate our reality based on our thoughts and our beliefs. We predict our reality into the future based on our past experiences. So we can only raise the amount of money that we believe is out there to be raised. And we can only do the things that we give credit to in our head as being real solutions. So I can't overstate enough how important that piece of the puzzle is. Once you have inner alignment, once you have that level of awareness, then you can start to also really identify who you're aligned with externally. And there's also an organizational alignment layer, but I'm not an organizational scientist, and that isn't a research route I've gone down. So I hope somebody else will take that on. But there's obviously an organizational alignment layer. And then there's, how do you identify alignment with funders? And that's different for individual funders, corporate funders, foundation funders. I walk organizations through something called funder lenses, which helps them better understand each funding entity. What are they looking for? What matters to them? What's the most important? Then we go through something called asset mapping, where they identify all the different things of value inside their organization and how those relate to different types of funders. And they funder match. So they start to see, wow, we have a lot of assets that relate to what corporate partners are looking for, or we have a lot of assets to what monthly givers are looking for. And then they focus on building their first, or if they're sort of consolidating, their first real robust fundraising strategy around where there's the most heat. Where's the most alignment between their assets and what a certain type of funder is looking for? Call it building their first bridge. And then I teach them how to build connected relationships, how to build trust, how to, build trust through emails that you send out that invite people in a way that feels good and open and curious. And the last thing I'll say here is that what I really teach is around alignment as an incentive, not just an intention, like alignment as an intention, not alignment as a strategy. It's easy to send an email to a donor saying, I'm looking to see if we're aligned, and then to go into that meeting and think that it's your job to convince them that you're aligned. What I teach is that your job is to go into that meeting to figure out, are you aligned? And if you're going in with that energy and that curiosity, it actually creates an entirely different space for co-creation and partnership to happen.
A lot of good advice there from Mallory Erickson, who described to us a strength-based approach to helping us deal with stresses. And, Mallory, that's just so common in so many other fields. There's asset-based community development. Search Institute has asset-based youth development. You talk to our economic development folks, they say, tell me about the assets that your local area has. Those are the types of businesses and industries that are going to move in. Take that strength-based approach. Don't lament what you don't have. Focus on what you do have and build from there. And Mallory, if I could just amplify a few of your points there and consistent with what we teach at the Fundraising School. You talked about the pressure. Boy, I had a good year and now they're going to double my goal. The fundraiser needs to be at that table when the goals are being set. Talking about the fear of rejection. You're going to hear no. And we teach the gift range chart. We say you need, 6 or 8 prospects for 2 or 4 gifts. We've built no into the plan. So it's okay to hear no and go do something nice for yourself. I think you've heard me say, when I hear no from a donor, I go get a bear claw up and Panera Bread. Just take care of myself. A little snack, get over it, on to the next opportunity. And the power dynamic. Yes, people of wealth have wealth and we can maybe feel uncomfortable, but you know what they are first? People. They're people with wealth. They're people who work at foundations. They're people who work at corporations. And to see them, that you are inviting them into your opportunity in a co-equal way. I have to ask you, you mentioned about the organizational piece. I'm wondering how many of the fundraisers you work with say, this is great, this is helping me, this is awesome. Can you go talk to my CEO? Can you go talk to my board? Because that's part of the issue with the transactional and the scarcity mindset, and only talk to the larger donors, don't involve everybody at all income levels and all these things. What role do CEOs and boards have in being part of this solution?
Yeah. I mean, I mention this a lot in the book, that there's no, you can't mindset your way out of a toxic environment, to sort of take the most extreme example. And there is certainly a lot of people that do buy my book for their whole team and read it together and talk about things together. And I do work with a lot of leaders as well who are trying to lead and change things, to make these practices accessible to all of their fundraisers. The other thing I will say is that we have seen fundraisers take these practices and do them inside their organizations, not in a position of not positional leadership, and they have changed their organization inside. And at first, they did get pushback from their boss. It feels like you're doing too little outreach, because they weren't spray firing outreach to everybody under the sun. They were being specific and targeted and, only focused on alignment. And it did create some discomfort, and it did create some hard conversations. And the fundraiser asked their boss, can you wait 2 months? Can you let me try this for 2 months? And we've watched it change entire organizations. It's scary. Change is scary. And I totally understand when you're at the top, making a huge change sometimes can feel, without having tried it before, can feel really overwhelming to do some sweeping change to your strategy. Sometimes it is about giving the folks on your team who are ready a chance to do things differently. Use a small test pilot and then see how it works, because it does. And then you can think about that larger reach. So for the folks who are managing up, I say it's like, ask for permission, maybe not to change everything at first, to test it, to demonstrate, to show how it can be different, and then use those proof points, that data inside your organization, to inspire larger change.
Great advice, Mallory. And at the Fundraising School, we teach leading up as part of our leadership curriculum. It's one of our most popular modules, one of our most popular workshop sessions that we do at conferences. There are ways to lead up, not guaranteed. At the end of the day, somebody still has that positional authority, but you use your information, you use your expertise, and what's called referent power. You can refer to me as a team player. I'm not trying to win an argument here. I care about the organization. And Mallory's giving us those types of handles with expertise and information to use as we lead up with these principles. The book is What the Fundraising. The author is Mallory Erickson. The book is published by our good friends at Wiley, and you can find Mallory Erickson online. Really complicated, folks. MalloryErickson.org. And there's a lot of good information there about the book, about her counseling and coaching service, and also some of the fun things she's doing with AI and fundraising as well. Now, again, so you've heard throughout this conversation, and this is why we invited Mallory. Her approach is so consistent with our curriculum at the Fundraising School. More than 24 courses leading to 5 different certificates. We're in person in 10 U.S. cities. And if you can't join us there, we're online, either live or recorded in the U.S., anywhere around the world. We can also customize training just for your nonprofit. or your association or your geographic area, whatever works best for you. We have quarterly webinars and, of course, these weekly podcasts. Our knowledge gathered in our textbook published by Wiley, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, the book now out in its 5th edition. Our website, easy to remember, go.iu.edu/TFRS. I'm grateful for our guest today, Mallory Erickson, in a podcast produced by the Emmy Award winner, Mike Anthony, and my colleague, Jennifer Boffman, CFRM. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.